The hole in the garden was completely empty. Yet, the old dog guarded it like it was a mountain of gold. He sat there from sunrise to sunset. He did not blink. He did not sleep. The dirt was just dirt, but to him, it was the whole world. Arthur watched the dog from the kitchen window. His coffee was cold. His heart was heavy. It had been 3 months since his wife, Eleanor, passed away. The house was too quiet now. The only sound was the wind and the soft breathing of Barnaby, their old sheepdog. Barnaby was acting strange. He never left that one dead spot in the yard. No grass grew there. No flowers bloomed. It was just an ugly brown patch. Arthur felt sad looking at it. He thought the empty dirt made the yard look as broken as his own heart. One afternoon, Arthur decided to fix it. He went to the town market and bought a small, beautiful apple tree. He brought it home and planted it right in the middle of the empty patch. He patted the dirt flat. "There," he whispered. "That looks much better." That night, a loud noise woke Arthur up. He heard a low, angry growl. It sounded like a wild wolf. Arthur grabbed his flashlight and ran outside. The cold wind bit his face. He pointed the light at the garden. He could not believe his own eyes. Barnaby was standing over the apple tree. The dog's teeth were locked around the wooden trunk. With a violent pull, Barnaby ripped the tree out of the ground. He threw the young tree to the side. Then he sat back down on the dirt, breathing hard. "Barnaby, what are you doing?" Arthur yelled. He walked over, feeling very angry. The dog had never ruined anything before. Arthur reached down to grab the dog's collar. "Move," Arthur said. "I have to fix this hole." He started to push the loose dirt back into place. Suddenly, Arthur's hand hit something soft in the dirt. It was not a rock or a tree root. He pulled it out. It was a small, faded gardening glove. It was Eleanor's favorite glove. She had worn it every single day. Arthur stared at it, his hands shaking. Before Arthur could say a word, Barnaby moved. The dog gently pushed Arthur's hand away with his wet nose. Then, Barnaby lay down flat over the exact spot where the glove had been. He put his head on his paws and looked up at Arthur. The message was clear. This was not an empty patch of dirt. It was a sacred place. And no one, not even Arthur, was allowed to touch it. Arthur slowly stood up. He left the glove. He left the dog. He went back inside, wondering what secret lay buried in the dark earth. Winter arrived early that year. The green hills turned white and cold. Frost covered the windows of the small farmhouse. The wind howled through the bare trees. Food became very hard to find for the wild animals. The sky was always gray, and the ground was hard as stone. Flocks of hungry black crows began to circle the farm. They landed in the garden, looking for any leftover seeds. But Barnaby was ready. As soon as a bird came near the brown patch of dirt, the old dog jumped up. He barked loud and chased them into the sky. Arthur watched from the porch, wrapped in a thick blanket. He noticed something very strange. Barnaby did not care about the rest of the garden. The birds could eat anything else. But the dead patch of dirt was completely forbidden. Barnaby guarded it with his own life. The cold weather got worse. The ground froze solid. Arthur saw Barnaby doing something new. The dog was digging with his front paws. He was not digging a hole in the center. Instead, he dug a deep, narrow circle around the edge of the barren patch. Arthur walked out into the freezing wind to look closer. Why was the dog making a trench? Then he saw them. Field mice. A whole family of them had tried to tunnel under the dirt to find warmth. Barnaby's trench blocked their path completely. The patch remained completely safe. Days turned into weeks. Barnaby grew thinner and more tired. His fur was covered in white frost every morning. Arthur tried to bring him inside by the warm fire, but the dog refused. If Arthur pulled his collar, Barnaby cried. He simply would not abandon his post outside. One afternoon, a dark shadow fell over the yard. It was not a crow. It was a large, angry hawk. The hawk swooped down fast, looking for mice near the dirt patch. Barnaby leaped high into the air to block the huge bird. The dog and the hawk crashed. There was a flash of sharp claws and white feathers. The hawk screamed and flew away, empty-handed. But Barnaby fell hard onto the frozen grass. Arthur ran out, his heart pounding. The old dog was bleeding. The hawk's sharp claws had torn a deep cut into Barnaby's left ear. "Oh, you brave old fool," Arthur whispered, kneeling in the cold snow. He tried to pick the dog up, but Barnaby pulled away. Blood dripped down the dog's soft white fur, staining the snow red. Yet, Barnaby walked right back to the center of the brown dirt patch. The dog sat down heavily. He ignored his bleeding ear. He ignored the freezing winter wind. He just stared at the sky, waiting for the next enemy. Arthur realized then that this was not a game. This was a war. And Barnaby was ready to die to win it. Arthur had to clean Barnaby's wound. The cut on the dog's ear was deep and looked very painful. Arthur walked slowly to the dusty storage room at the back of the house. He needed to find the old medical kit. The room was dark and smelled like forgotten memories. He reached up to a high shelf. His hand knocked into a small wooden box. It fell to the floor with a loud crack. The lid popped open. Arthur froze. He recognized the box immediately. It was Eleanor's keepsake box. She used to keep her most precious things inside. Inside the broken box, there was an old notebook with a brown leather cover. It was Eleanor's gardening diary. Arthur picked it up gently. His hands shook as he touched the pages. He had not seen her handwriting since the day she died. He sat down on the floor. He turned to the very last page she ever wrote. The date was the day before she went to the hospital. The ink was slightly messy, as if her hand had been very weak. Arthur began to read, his eyes filling with tears. Her voice echoed in his mind. "The garden looks so empty today," the diary read. "I know I will not be here to see the next spring. But I am not sad. I have left one final secret in the earth. I have given Barnaby a very special mission. I hope he keeps his promise." Arthur stopped breathing for a second. A secret in the earth? A mission? He looked out the window at the old dog sitting in the freezing cold. Suddenly, Barnaby's strange behavior made perfect sense. The dog was not crazy at all. He was simply following Eleanor's final order. Arthur quickly turned the page, eager to learn more. He needed to know what she had buried. But his heart dropped. The next page was torn out. Someone had ripped the paper right down the middle. Only a tiny piece of the page was left attached to the spine. Arthur moved closer to the window to read the tiny, broken words left on the torn edge. There was only one sentence fragment left. It said, "My last gift for Arthur. I just hope it has time to bloom before the rest of the sentence was gone forever." A gift for him? Arthur's mind raced. What could grow in that hard, dead dirt? Why was it so important that Barnaby had to risk his life against birds and wild hawks? Arthur held the torn diary to his chest. He closed his eyes and let the tears fall. He finally understood the heavy burden the old dog carried. Barnaby was protecting the very last piece of Eleanor's love. Arthur wiped his eyes and grabbed the white bandages. He knew what he had to do. He would not force the dog inside anymore. He would help him fight. That night, the worst snowstorm of the year hit the valley. The weather report on the radio warned everyone to stay indoors. The wind sounded like a train crashing against the house. The temperature dropped far below zero. The thick snow fell so fast it covered the windows completely. Arthur looked out into the white darkness. He could not leave Barnaby outside in this deadly cold. The old dog would freeze to death in an hour. Arthur put on his heavy coat and went out into the storm. He dragged the struggling dog inside and locked the door. Barnaby panicked. He scratched at the thick wooden door, crying loudly. He barked and whined, begging to go back to his patch of dirt. Arthur felt terrible, but he had to be strict. He took a strong metal chain and attached it to Barnaby's collar. He tied it securely. "I am sorry, old friend," Arthur said quietly, "but I cannot lose you too. You must stay inside tonight. The dirt will have to survive on its own." Arthur went upstairs to bed, but he could not sleep. The howling wind and the dog's sad crying kept him awake. Around midnight, the crying suddenly stopped. For a moment, Arthur felt relieved. He thought Barnaby had finally fallen asleep. But then a terrifying noise shook the whole house. It sounded like an explosion of glass in the kitchen. Arthur jumped out of bed, his heart pounding very fast. He ran downstairs, turning on the lights. The kitchen was a complete disaster area. The cold winter storm was blowing straight into the house. The large glass window above the back door was completely shattered. There was broken glass everywhere. The heavy metal chain lay pulled apart on the floor. Barnaby was gone. The dog had broken the strong metal chain using pure force. Then, he had jumped directly through the thick glass window to escape into the wild storm. Arthur did not think. He put on his winter boots and grabbed a bright flashlight. He ran outside. The wind pushed him backward. The snow blinded him. "Barnaby," he screamed, but the wind stole his voice. He shined the light toward the barren patch in the garden. The snow was 2 feet deep everywhere. But as he got much closer, he saw a dark shape. Barnaby was not moving. The dog was lying perfectly still. He was curled into a tight ball directly over the center of the dirt patch. The heavy snow was falling on his fur. Arthur dropped to his knees, terrified. He thought the brave dog was dead. He touched Barnaby's side. Barnaby opened one tired eye. The dog was shivering violently, but he was alive. Arthur realized what was happening. Barnaby was using his own body heat to melt the freezing snow. He was acting like a living blanket, keeping the frozen earth warm, saving Eleanor's final, hidden secret. The long, brutal winter finally ended. The snow melted away, leaving the ground wet and soft. Green grass began to grow across the hills again. The tall trees grew fresh new leaves. Spring had arrived. But in Arthur's garden, the special patch of dirt remained completely empty and brown. Barnaby still sat by the patch every single day. He looked much older now. His fur was messy, His ear was permanently scarred, and he moved very slowly. But his eyes were still sharp. He watched the dirt as if expecting magic. But nothing green ever appeared. One sunny morning, Mr. Higgins, the neighbor, walked to the garden fence. He looked at Barnaby and shook his head. "Arthur," the neighbor yelled loudly, "that dog of yours is going crazy. He barks at nothing. He stares at mud all day. You should send him to the shelter." Arthur felt a sudden flash of hot anger. "Mind your own business, Higgins," Arthur replied sharply. "My dog is doing an important job." Higgins laughed. "A job? Protecting a pile of dead mud? Watch this." Before Arthur could stop him, Higgins picked up a heavy, sharp stone. With a strong throw, Higgins threw the heavy stone right at the center of the barren patch. Time seemed to slow down. Barnaby did not hesitate. Even though his old legs hurt badly, he leaped forward. He opened his mouth and caught the flying stone in midair. Barnaby dropped the stone safely outside the dirt patch. Then, the dog whimpered softly. Blood dripped slowly from his mouth. The heavy stone had broken one of Barnaby's old front teeth. Arthur rushed forward, furious. He yelled at the bad neighbor to leave and never come back again. Arthur knelt next to his brave dog. He gently wiped the blood from Barnaby's mouth with a soft cloth. The dog licked Arthur's hand. Barnaby was clearly in pain, but he immediately turned his head back to watch the dirt. He was ready for the next attack. Arthur stood up. A new fire burned in his chest. He walked straight to his wooden tool shed. He took out strong wooden posts, a heavy hammer, and thick metal wire. He carried all the tools out to the garden. He looked at Barnaby and smiled warmly at him. "You have fought all alone for too long, my friend," Arthur said softly. "It is time I helped you." Arthur started to dig deep holes around the dirt patch. He swung the heavy hammer, driving the wooden posts into the earth. Sweat dripped down his face. He did not stop. By the time the sun went down, Arthur had built a strong, tall fence completely around the barren patch. No bird, no mouse, and no stone could ever get in again. Barnaby walked up to the new fence. He sat down proudly next to Arthur. Together, they watched the dirt. The warm sun finally returned to the quiet farm. The thick snow melted completely. Bright green grass covered the hills. But spring brought new, hungry enemies. Large black magpies flew into the garden. They were looking for fresh worms and seeds in the soft, wet earth. The strong wooden fence protected the dirt patch, but the clever birds tried to fly over it. Barnaby had to stay awake. He barked loudly to scare the birds away. The old dog was extremely tired. His legs shook, and he could barely stand up straight anymore. One peaceful morning, Arthur walked out to check the garden. The air was fresh and cool. He looked over the tall wooden fence. He gasped in surprise. Right in the exact center of the dirt patch, something new had finally appeared. It was a tiny green shoot. The small plant was incredibly fragile. It was so thin and weak that a strong wind could easily break it. It was definitely not a common weed. It looked special. Barnaby saw it too. The old dog wagged his tail slowly. His hard work was showing results. Arthur felt a warm feeling in his heavy chest. Eleanor's secret was actually alive. But his happiness did not last long at all. By late afternoon, the clear blue sky turned a strange, cold gray. The radio announcer gave a sudden, terrible warning to the local farmers. A deadly late frost was coming tonight. A sudden freeze could easily kill the tiny, fragile shoot. Arthur was very worried. He needed to find a glass jar to cover the baby plant. He quickly got into his old truck and drove to the town market immediately. While Arthur was driving, the temperature dropped very fast. Sharp ice began to form on the grass. Barnaby felt the bitter cold wind. The dog looked at the tiny green shoot. It was shivering. Barnaby knew his own body heat was simply not enough this time. Barnaby ran back to the house's back porch. He looked up at the wooden coat rack. Hanging there was Eleanor's old, soft woolen scarf. She used to wear it every winter. Barnaby jumped up high. He carefully grabbed the soft red wool with his teeth. The dog pulled the long scarf down from the hook. He ran back to the freezing garden. He carried the warm fabric very gently. He pushed through the small gate Arthur had left open. Barnaby reached the tiny green shoot before the ice could destroy it. Very carefully, the dog dropped the thick woolen scarf right over the freezing baby plant. Arthur returned home an hour later with a glass jar. He ran to the garden, expecting the worst. Instead, he saw the red scarf. The tiny green plant was perfectly warm and safe. The dangerous frost passed. The weather grew warmer every single day. Under the gentle spring sun, the tiny shoot grew taller and stronger. It was no longer a weak baby plant. Small, dark green leaves began to unfold from the thin stem. It was a beautiful sight. Arthur spent his mornings sitting by the wooden fence. He watched the plant grow with pure wonder. Barnaby sat right beside him, resting his tired head on Arthur's knee. The old dog seemed very relaxed now. The hardest part of his long, cold battle was finally over. One bright afternoon, Arthur put on his reading glasses. He leaned closely over the fence to look at the new leaves. The edges of the leaves were slightly sharp. The stem had very tiny, soft thorns. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. He recognized the plant immediately. It was not just any flower. It was a rose bush. But it was a very specific, incredibly rare kind. It was a Juliet rose. Eleanor had talked about this beautiful flower for 10 years. It was famous for being the most difficult rose in the world to grow. Eleanor had ordered expensive seeds many times. She had read hundreds of books about soil and sunlight. But her Juliet roses had always died before they could even sprout. She used to cry over the empty dirt. Arthur never understood why she cared so much about one flower. Arthur ran inside the house. His hands were shaking. He found Eleanor's old, torn diary again. He looked at the final date written on the top of the page. It was May 14th. That was the exact same morning the ambulance had taken her away forever. Arthur closed his eyes. The memory hit him like a heavy wave. He remembered waking up that morning. Eleanor was not in bed. He had looked out the bedroom window. He had seen her kneeling in the garden dirt. She looked very pale and extremely weak. Barnaby had been sitting right next to her. She was whispering something to the dog. Then, she had patted the dirt flat with her gardening glove. A few hours later, her heart stopped beating. She had used her very last bit of energy to plant that final seed. Arthur finally understood the torn sentence in the diary. My last gift for Arthur. I just hope it has time to bloom. She wanted to leave him something beautiful. She knew she was dying. She wanted him to have a living reminder of her endless, blooming love. Tears fell down Arthur's rough cheeks. He walked slowly back to the garden. He knelt in the dirt beside the brave old dog. Arthur gently hugged Barnaby's neck. "You knew," Arthur whispered softly into the dog's ear. "You kept her final promise. You are a good boy." The Juliet rose bush grew very quickly now. It drank the spring rain and soaked up the bright sunshine. Soon, a single, perfectly round flower bud appeared at the very top. It was tightly closed, holding its secret color inside. The garden felt full of quiet magic. But the rare flower was not safe yet. High up in the tall oak trees, wildwood pigeons were watching. These greedy birds loved to eat fresh, soft flower buds. They gathered in the branches, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They were a dangerous new threat. Barnaby heard the birds making noises above. He tried to stand up and bark, but his body betrayed him. His legs were too weak. His throat was dry and tired. He could only make a soft, quiet sound. The pigeons were not scared of him anymore. A large, fat pigeon flew down. It landed right on the wooden fence, staring at the green bud. Barnaby panicked. He knew he had to do something fast. The old dog looked around the yard. He saw Arthur's bright yellow, reflective work jacket hanging on a chair. Barnaby grabbed the heavy yellow jacket with his teeth. The shiny material caught the bright sunlight. The dog began to run slowly around the outside of the wooden fence. He dragged the bright, flashing jacket behind him. He looked like a strange, moving yellow scarecrow in the yard. The sudden flash of bright yellow light terrified the pigeon. The bird squawked loudly and flew back up into the tall tree. But more pigeons were arriving. The flock was getting bigger and braver. Barnaby kept dragging the heavy jacket in a circle. He was breathing very heavily. The dog's paws slipped on the wet grass. He was completely exhausted. His old heart was beating too fast. But he refused to stop running. If he stopped, the birds would destroy Eleanor's final gift. He dragged the jacket one more time. His vision started to blur slightly. Suddenly, the back door of the house flew open. Arthur ran out into the yard. He was not carrying a tool or a stick. Instead, he held two large, heavy metal cooking pots. He looked up at the flock of greedy birds in the tall oak tree. Arthur crashed the two heavy metal pots together. Bang! 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 The loud, booming noise echoed across the entire farm. It sounded like thunder. The flock of wild pigeons panicked completely. They flapped their wings wildly and flew far away into the deep woods. The yard was safe. Arthur dropped the metal pots. He ran to Barnaby. The exhausted dog had finally stopped running. He dropped the yellow jacket and lay down in the soft grass, panting hard. Arthur sat beside him, stroking his fur. "We did it, buddy," Arthur said. "We fought them together." The next morning was very quiet. A soft, white mist covered the farm. The air was cool and peaceful. Arthur woke up early. He looked at the calendar on the kitchen wall. His heart felt heavy. Today was exactly 1 year since his beautiful Eleanor had passed away. He made a hot cup of coffee and walked outside. The thick morning mist was slowly disappearing. A warm, golden light began to shine through the clouds. Arthur walked toward the wooden fence. Barnaby was already there, sitting perfectly still. The dog was staring intently at the plant. Arthur stood next to the old dog. He looked over the wooden fence. The tight green bud was gone. In its place was a miracle. The Juliet rose had finally bloomed during the quiet night. It was the most beautiful flower Arthur had ever seen in his life. The rose was large and perfectly shaped. The inside petals were a soft, warm peach color. The outside petals were a bright, delicate pink. It looked glowing and magical in the early morning sunlight. A sweet, wonderful smell filled the air, making the whole garden smell like heaven. It was perfect. Eleanor had finally succeeded. She had grown the impossible flower. Arthur could not speak. He just stood there, letting the sweet smell wash over him. He felt like Eleanor was standing right beside him. He felt her warm smile in the gentle spring breeze. Barnaby slowly stood up. The old dog did not bark. He did not run around. He walked very carefully to the open gate of the wooden fence. He stepped inside the sacred dirt patch for the very first time. He moved slowly toward the beautiful, blooming rose. Arthur watched quietly. He did not stop the dog. Barnaby reached the tall green stem. He gently lifted his heavy, tired head. The dog pushed his wet black nose against the soft peach petals. He took a long, deep breath. He smelled the sweet scent of the flower. Barnaby closed his eyes. For the first time in a whole year, his body completely relaxed. The tight muscles in his back softened. The worried look in his eyes faded away. He let out a long, quiet sigh. He knew that his difficult mission was finally over completely. The brave dog turned his head and looked at Arthur. His dark eyes were full of peace and deep love. Then Barnaby slowly lay down on the soft dirt, right under the shade of the beautiful rose. He rested his chin on his paws and closed his eyes. The sun rose higher in the sky. The golden light warmed the garden. Arthur smiled through his tears. He knew Eleanor was happy now. Her final gift had bloomed, and her loyal friend had kept his promise. The garden was finally filled with pure love and total peace. Arthur knelt on the ground next to the wooden fence. He reached out and gently touched the soft petals of the Juliet rose. For the first time in a whole year, Arthur let himself cry. He did not try to hide his deep sadness or his overwhelming love. His tears fell quietly onto the dark earth. He cried for his beautiful wife. He cried for the long, lonely winter. And he cried out of deep gratitude. He was so thankful for the magical gift she had left behind to heal his broken, hurting, and empty heart. Arthur wiped his wet face and looked down at Barnaby. The old dog was sleeping so peacefully. His breathing was very slow and very quiet. Arthur gently stroked the dog's soft, scarred ear. "Sleep now, my brave friend," Arthur whispered softly. "You have earned a very long rest." Arthur sat in the garden for a long time. The warm sun moved across the blue sky. When the afternoon shadows grew long, Arthur touched Barnaby again. The dog's fur was cool. His chest was completely still. Barnaby had passed away silently in his sleep, dreaming of spring. The loyal dog had given his last bit of strength to see the flower bloom. He died exactly where he wanted to be. He was resting safely under the beautiful rose he had fought so hard to protect. Arthur felt a deep sadness, but also a beautiful peace. Years passed quickly on the quiet farm. The seasons changed from winter to spring many times. But the garden never looked empty or dead again. Arthur had learned Eleanor's secret. He took the tiny seeds from the first Juliet rose and carefully planted them all across the yard. Today, the entire garden is a breathtaking ocean of peach and pink flowers. Hundreds of Juliet roses bloom every single spring. The sweet, heavenly smell reaches all the way to the town road. People often stop their cars just to look at the incredible beauty of the farm. Arthur is much older now. His hair is completely white. He walks with a wooden cane. On a warm Sunday afternoon, he sits on a comfortable wooden bench in the middle of the blooming flowers. A small, energetic black puppy is playing happily in the green grass nearby. The playful puppy runs over and jumps onto Arthur's lap. Arthur laughs and pets the little dog's head. "Look at these flowers, little one," Arthur says softly. "They are very beautiful, aren't they? But they only exist because of a very brave hero who guarded them long ago." Arthur looks toward the center of the garden. The original rose bush stands there, taller and stronger than all the rest. Beneath it lies a small, smooth white stone. Arthur smiles warmly. The silent guardian is gone, but his endless love and fierce loyalty will bloom there forever.